Learn to love yourself more than anyone else. The key to inner peace and self-worth. There is a quiet truth that many people avoid, not because it is complicated, but because it is uncomfortable to accept. You cannot expect others to value you more than you value yourself. No matter how much you give, no matter how kind you are, no matter how much effort you put into relationships, people will always meet you at the level you meet yourself. At first, this can feel unfair. You may think, I treat others well, I care, I give my time, my energy, why am I not receiving the same in return? And the answer is not always in what you give to others, but in what you allow for yourself. A chosen woman begins to notice this pattern slowly. She sees how often she says yes when she wants to say no, how often she stays silent when something feels wrong, how often she gives more than she receives, hoping that eventually things will balance out. But over time, she realizes something deeper. This is not about others taking too much. It is about her not setting a standard for how she deserves to be treated. Because when you do not value your own time, others will not protect it. When you do not respect your own boundaries, others will not see them. When you do not honor your own needs, others will overlook them. Not always intentionally, but naturally. Because people respond to what you show them. At first, she resists this idea. It feels like blaming herself for how others behave. But as she reflects more honestly, she begins to see that this is not about blame. It is about awareness. Awareness of what she accepts. Awareness of what she tolerates. Awareness of how she treats herself when no one is watching. She begins to notice her internal patterns. How she speaks to herself after making a mistake. How quickly she dismisses her own feelings. How easily she puts her own needs aside to keep peace with others. And in that awareness, she understands something clearly. Self-worth is not built through external validation. It is built through how you relate to yourself. This realization begins to shift her behavior. She starts with small changes. She listens to herself more carefully. When something feels off, she does not ignore it immediately. She allows herself to acknowledge it. She gives importance to her own feelings instead of dismissing them. And this simple act begins to build connection. Because for the first time, she is not abandoning herself. She is paying attention. There is also a change in how she treats her time and energy. She becomes more selective, not in a harsh or distant way, but in a respectful way. She understands that her time is limited, her energy is valuable, and not everything deserves access to it. So she begins to choose more carefully who she gives her attention to, what she invests her energy in, when she says yes, and when she allows herself to say no. At first, this feels uncomfortable. There is a fear of disappointing others, a fear of being misunderstood, a fear that if she stops giving as much, she may lose connection. But she stays with the discomfort because she understands that constantly giving without honoring herself is not love. It is self-neglect. And slowly, something begins to change. Her sense of worth starts to grow, not because others are treating her differently yet, but because she is treating herself differently. She is no longer ignoring her needs. She is no longer overextending herself to gain approval. She is no longer placing her value in how much she gives to others. She is beginning to stand in her own worth. And as this internal shift strengthens, the external world begins to reflect it. People start to notice her boundaries. They become more aware of how they approach her. The dynamic begins to change, not because she demanded it, but because she embodied it. Because when you value yourself, it becomes visible, not through words, but through behavior, through the way you carry yourself, through the way you protect your energy, through the way you respond to what does not align with you. And that visibility creates respect. Not forced respect, but natural respect that comes from clarity. She also realizes that self-worth is not about thinking you are better than others. It is about understanding that you are not less. It is about recognizing your own value without comparison. And once that recognition becomes stable, you stop chasing validation. You stop needing others to confirm your worth. You stop adjusting yourself to fit expectations that do not align with who you are. Because you already know your value, and that knowing changes everything. You move differently, you speak differently, you choose differently, not out of fear, but out of respect for yourself. And that is when she understands something deeply. No one will ever value you more than you value yourself, because your actions teach them what is acceptable. And once you begin to honor yourself fully, the world begins to respond in a way that reflects that truth. There is a pattern many people fall into without even realizing it. It feels like kindness, like care, like being a good person. But beneath it, there is something deeper happening: self-abandonment. Every time you ignore your own needs just to keep someone else comfortable, every time you silence your truth to avoid conflict, every time you say yes when everything inside you is saying no, you slowly move further away from yourself. At first, it doesn't feel serious. It feels small. Just one moment, just one decision. You tell yourself it doesn't matter. You tell yourself you're being understanding, patient, flexible. And maybe in some moments that's true. But when it becomes a pattern, something begins to change inside you. A chosen woman starts to notice this shift. She feels a quiet discomfort that she cannot fully explain. On the outside, everything may seem fine. She is doing what others expect, maintaining peace, avoiding tension. But inside, there is a growing distance between who she is and how she is living, because she is not listening to herself anymore. She begins to notice how often she overrides her own feelings. When something doesn't feel right, she pushes it aside. When she needs rest, she keeps going. When she wants to speak, she stays silent. And over time, this creates a sense of disconnection, not from others, but from herself. This is where awareness begins. She starts to question her behavior, not with judgment, but with honesty. She asks herself, why do I keep doing this? And slowly, she begins to see the answer. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of not being liked or accepted. And because of this fear, she has been choosing others over herself again and again. This realization is not easy to accept, because it means acknowledging that she has been part of the pattern, not intentionally, not consciously, but through repeated choices that placed her own needs second. But instead of blaming herself, she chooses to understand. She realizes that this pattern was learned. It came from wanting connection, from wanting to be accepted, from believing that being needed or liked was more important than being true to herself. And once she sees it clearly, she begins to change it. Not all at once, but slowly. She starts by listening, really listening to herself. When something feels off, she does not ignore it immediately. She pauses. She acknowledges it. She allows her feelings to exist without pushing them away. And this is where reconnection begins, because for the first time, she is giving herself the attention she has been giving to everyone else. There is also a shift in how she responds to situations. She begins to practice honesty, not harsh honesty, not reactive honesty, but calm and clear honesty. When something doesn't feel right, she expresses it. When she needs space, she allows herself to take it. When she cannot do something, she says no without over-explaining. At first, this feels uncomfortable. There is resistance. The old fear appears again. What if people don't like this version of me? What if things change? And the truth is, some things will change. But she begins to understand that change is not always loss. Sometimes it is alignment, because relationships built on self-abandonment are not truly stable. They depend on you continuing to ignore yourself. And once you stop doing that, the dynamic shifts. Some people will understand, some will adjust, some may not stay. And she learns to accept that, because losing connection with others is difficult. But losing connection with yourself is far more damaging. She also begins to feel a different kind of strength. Not the strength of pleasing everyone, but the strength of standing with herself. The strength of knowing that her needs matter, that her feelings are valid, that her voice deserves to be heard. And this strength changes how she moves through life. She no longer seeks approval in the same way. She no longer feels the need to be everything for everyone. She becomes more grounded, more centered, more aligned with who she truly is. There is also a deeper sense of peace that comes with this, because when you stop abandoning yourself, you stop carrying that internal conflict. You are no longer fighting between what you feel and what you show. You are no longer pretending to be okay when you are not. You become honest with yourself first, and that honesty creates freedom. Freedom to express, freedom to choose, freedom to be. She understands now that self-love is not about always putting yourself above others. It is about not placing yourself below them. It is about balance. And that balance begins with one simple but powerful decision: to stop abandoning yourself, even in small moments. Because those small moments shape everything. And when you begin to choose yourself consistently, you don't lose who you are for others anymore. You finally return to who you are for yourself. There is a relationship in your life that shapes everything else, and yet it is often the one people ignore the most. The relationship you have with yourself. It is quiet, constant, always present. And at the center of that relationship is your inner voice, the way you speak to yourself when no one else is around. Most people don't notice how powerful this voice is. It runs in the background, commenting, judging, reminding, comparing. It becomes so familiar that it feels normal. But a chosen woman begins to listen more carefully. She starts to hear the tone behind the words. And what she discovers is not always kind. The voice can be critical. It can be impatient. It can focus more on mistakes than progress. It can remind her of what she lacks instead of what she has built. And without realizing it, she has been accepting this voice as truth. But one day, something shifts. She begins to question it. She asks herself, if someone spoke to me the way I speak to myself, would I feel supported? And the answer is often no. This realization is not meant to create guilt. It is meant to create awareness. Because once you see it clearly, you understand something important. Your inner voice is not fixed. It has been shaped over time, through experiences, through repeated thoughts, through patterns that were never questioned. And what has been shaped can be reshaped. At first, this feels unfamiliar. The mind is used to running on autopilot. Thoughts appear quickly, and the inner voice follows them without pause. Trying to change that pattern requires attention. It requires catching the thought before it becomes a belief. And that is where she begins. She starts by noticing. When a negative thought appears, she does not immediately follow it. She pauses and observes it. She creates a small distance between herself and the voice in her mind. And in that distance, she introduces a question. Is this true? Is this helpful? Is this the only way to see this? These questions begin to loosen the hold of that inner voice, because many of the things it says are not facts. They are interpretations. They are habits. They are reflections of past experiences, not present reality. And once she sees that, she begins to respond differently. She does not try to force positivity in an unrealistic way. She does not pretend everything is perfect. Instead, she chooses a more balanced and supportive perspective. If she makes a mistake, instead of saying, I always mess things up, she shifts to, I made a mistake, but I can learn from it. If she feels unsure, instead of saying, I'm not capable, she allows space for growth. I'm still learning, and that's okay. These small shifts may seem simple, but they create a powerful change over time, because the way you speak to yourself shapes how you feel, and how you feel shapes how you act. When your inner voice is constantly negative, your energy lowers, your confidence weakens, your willingness to try decreases. But when your inner voice becomes more supportive, something inside you begins to open. You feel safer to grow. You feel more willing to take steps. You feel more stable in who you are. This is where self-respect begins, not in how others treat you, but in how you treat yourself internally. She also realizes that changing her inner voice is not about being perfect. There are still moments when old patterns appear. There are still days when doubt shows up, when the mind tries to return to familiar negativity. But now, she does not let it take over. She notices it, she questions it, she redirects it. And each time she does this, she strengthens a new pattern, a pattern of awareness, a pattern of self-support, a pattern of speaking to herself with respect. Over time, this becomes natural. Her inner voice becomes calmer, more patient, more understanding. It no longer pushes her down. It begins to guide her forward. And that guidance changes everything, because when your inner voice becomes your support, you are no longer dependent on external validation in the same way. You are not constantly seeking approval to feel worthy. You already feel grounded within yourself. She moves differently now. She trusts herself more. She speaks with more clarity. She carries a quiet confidence that comes from within. And people feel that, not because she says it, but because she embodies it. Because when you are not fighting yourself internally, your energy becomes aligned. You are not divided between doubt and belief. You are steady, and that steadiness creates strength. She understands now that self-love is not just about what you do on the outside. It is about how you treat yourself on the inside, in the moments no one sees. The words you use, the tone you carry, the patience you give yourself. And once you begin to change that inner dialogue, you begin to change your entire experience of life. Because the voice within you is always speaking. And when it becomes your support instead of your enemy, you no longer feel alone in your growth. You feel guided by it. There is a moment many people try to avoid without even realizing it. The moment of being alone with themselves. No distractions, no conversations, no noise to fill the space. Just silence. And for a lot of people, that silence feels uncomfortable, almost heavy, as if something is missing. So they stay busy. They surround themselves with people, with conversations, with constant input. Not always because they enjoy it, but because it keeps them from facing that quiet space within. Because in that space there are thoughts, feelings, and truths that have been ignored. But a chosen woman begins to approach this differently. She stops seeing solitude as something negative. She begins to understand that being alone is not the same as being lonely. Loneliness is a disconnection. But solitude, when embraced consciously, becomes a reconnection. At first, it is not easy. When she sits in silence, her mind becomes louder. Thoughts appear quickly. Old memories surface. Questions arise that she has not fully answered. It feels easier to escape back into distraction. But she chooses to stay, even if only for a few moments at first. And slowly something begins to shift. The silence that once felt uncomfortable starts to feel spacious. Instead of being filled with noise from the outside, she begins to hear herself more clearly. Not the reactive thoughts, not the surface-level noise, but something deeper, her real feelings, her real desires, her real state. And for the first time, she is not avoiding them. She is listening. This is where reconnection begins. Because when you are always surrounded by external influence, opinions, expectations, constant interaction, it becomes easy to lose track of who you are beneath it all. You start adapting, you start adjusting, you start becoming what is needed in each moment. But in solitude, there is nothing to adapt to. There is no role to play, no expectation to meet, no one to impress. There is only you, and that can feel unfamiliar at first. But as she spends more time in that space, she begins to feel something she hasn't felt in a long time: clarity. She starts to understand what truly matters to her, not what others expect, not what she has been told, but what feels aligned from within. She begins to recognize her own patterns, her own habits, her own ways of thinking. And with that awareness comes understanding. She sees where she has been pushing herself too hard, where she has been ignoring her own needs, where she has been holding on to things that no longer serve her. And because she is not distracted, she can face these things honestly. There is also a sense of peace that begins to grow in this solitude, not because everything is perfect, but because she is no longer running from herself. She is no longer avoiding her thoughts or covering them with constant noise. She is present with herself, and that presence creates calm. She starts to feel comfortable being alone, not in a way that isolates her from others, but in a way that strengthens her connection to herself. She no longer depends on constant interaction to feel okay. She no longer needs to fill every moment with something external. She can simply be. And that ability becomes powerful, because when you are comfortable with yourself in silence, you are not easily influenced by the outside world. You are not constantly seeking validation. You are not adjusting yourself just to fit into every environment. You are grounded. She also begins to notice how this affects her relationships. When she is connected to herself, she does not enter relationships from a place of need. She is not looking for others to fill a space within her. Instead, she connects from a place of wholeness, and that changes the dynamic. There is less pressure, less dependency, more clarity, because she knows who she is, and she is not losing that in the presence of others. Over time, solitude becomes something she values, not as an escape, but as a practice, a space where she can reset, a space where she can reflect, a space where she can return to herself. And in that space, she continues to grow. She becomes more aware, more aligned, more at peace, because she understands now that being alone is not emptiness. It is an opportunity to reconnect with yourself without distraction, to understand your own mind without interference, to build a relationship with yourself that is not dependent on anyone else. And once that relationship becomes strong, everything else begins to change. You no longer fear being alone. You begin to value it, because in that quiet space, you are not losing anything. You are finding yourself again. There comes a moment when you start to realize that not everything in your life deserves access to you. Not every conversation needs your energy. Not every person needs your time. Not every situation deserves your emotional investment. And yet, for a long time, you may have been giving all of it freely, without question. At first, it feels like kindness. You want to be there for others. You want to help, to support, to understand. And there is nothing wrong with that. But a chosen woman begins to notice when that giving becomes draining, when it is no longer coming from a place of strength, but from a place of obligation. She starts to feel it in subtle ways, a sense of exhaustion after certain interactions, a heaviness after conversations that should have been light, a quiet frustration when her time is taken without consideration. And instead of ignoring these feelings like she used to, she begins to pay attention, because these feelings are not random. They are signals that her energy is being used in ways that are not aligned with her well-being. This is where she begins to understand the importance of boundaries, not as something harsh or restrictive, but as something protective. Because boundaries are not about pushing people away. They are about defining what is acceptable for you and what is not. They are about creating a space where your energy can exist without being constantly drained. At first, this idea feels uncomfortable. There is a fear that setting boundaries might make her seem distant, selfish, or difficult. The mind creates stories. What if people misunderstand? What if they leave? What if things change? And the truth is, things might change. But she begins to see that change is not always negative, because when there are no boundaries, there is no clarity. People do not know your limits because you have never expressed them. And without limits, your energy becomes open to everything. So she starts small. She begins by noticing what drains her and what supports her. She becomes aware of the difference between interactions that feel balanced and those that feel one-sided. And with that awareness, she starts to make small adjustments. She gives herself permission to say no, not with guilt, not with long explanations, but with calm clarity. She understands that saying no to something that drains her is not rejecting others. It is respecting herself. She also begins to protect her time. She no longer feels the need to be available all the time. She allows herself to step back when needed, to take space without feeling like she has to justify it, to prioritize her own well-being without apologizing for it. At first, this feels unfamiliar. The old patterns try to pull her back. The urge to say yes, to avoid discomfort, to keep everything smooth and easy. But she stays aware. She reminds herself that constantly saying yes to others while saying no to herself is not balance. And slowly, her actions begin to change. There is also a shift in how others respond to her. When you begin to set boundaries, people notice. Some will respect it immediately. Some will take time to adjust. And some may resist because they were used to having unlimited access to your time and energy. And she learns to accept that. Because boundaries are not about controlling others' reactions. They are about honoring your own limits. Over time, something powerful begins to happen. Her energy feels different, more stable, more protected, more intentional. She is no longer giving from a place of depletion. She is giving from a place of choice. And because of that, her presence becomes more genuine. She is not overwhelmed. She is not resentful. She is not drained. She is balanced. There is also a deeper sense of self-respect that grows from this. Because every time she sets a boundary, she is reinforcing a message to herself. I matter. My time matters. My energy matters. And that message begins to strengthen her self-worth. She no longer feels the need to prove her value by overgiving. She no longer feels responsible for everything around her. She understands that her role is not to carry everyone, but to remain grounded within herself. And from that grounded place, she can still connect with others. But now, it is different. It is not forced. It is not draining. It is not based on obligation. It is based on clarity and respect. She gives where it feels right. She steps back where it is needed. She listens to herself before responding to others. And this creates a sense of peace because she is no longer stretched in multiple directions. She is no longer losing herself in the process of trying to be everything for everyone. She is centered, and in that center, she finds strength. She understands now that boundaries are not walls. They are filters. They allow what is healthy to enter and keep what is harmful at a distance. And once she begins to live with this awareness, her energy is no longer something that is easily taken. It is something she chooses to share. And that choice changes everything. There is a quiet misunderstanding many people carry about self-love. They think it is something you reach one day, like a destination, a moment where you finally feel complete, confident, and fully at peace with yourself. And once you arrive there, it stays. But a chosen woman begins to realize something deeper. Self-love is not a single decision. It is a daily practice. It is built in the small moments that most people overlook. The way you speak to